Today guys, we're going to be doing some mods to the Sea Doo 951 XP Limited here. This is a 99 and we're going to be getting rid of the air box, which is under the pipe, doing some carb mods, getting rid of all this stuff just to make working on the boat a little bit easier and make it run a lot better. So let me show you what we're going to do. So this is a really common first mod to these boats, basically rejet kit, ProK filters, and these outerwears, which will help water ingestion. At the same time, we're going to get rid of the choke and put a primer in. Basically, the only parts you're going to need from Sea Doo are a couple carb gaskets and then some jets. Everything else, like the primer kit, which we got there, these new high-speed T-handles, that's all going to be aftermarket stuff, and obviously these filters are as well. So these filters here, or flame arrestors is probably a better term for them. They are going to reduce manifold pressure, so it's going to cause the carburetors to not be able to suck fuel as easily. So we're going to go with 2.3 needle seats. I got new, I believe those are 95 pilot jet, and then our main jets are going to be 167.5s. And we're going to retain the stock springs on the pop-off pressure, and that's going to drop it to about 20 psi, I believe, or thereabouts. These T-handles, I'll show you in a little bit more detail as to why we're going to use those once I get the carbs off. We're going to replace the choke components with these primer components. That's what we need that fuel line for there. So the reason now is a good time to do a primer install and choke delete is because with these guys, we're significantly reducing the air restriction, and the choke plates are causing an air restriction. So it doesn't make any sense to have that in there. So that's why we're gonna go ahead and do this. So first thing we're gonna do on the boat with a couple 10mm wrenches is get rid of the air intake tubes, one on this side, one on this side, and then set those aside. Okay, so now that those are out of the way, we need to make room to get the big giant air box out. So we're just gonna undo the oil tank straps. Okay, then we'll just move our oil tank into about that position, trying to keep it level so you don't get any leaks. There is a piece of foam under it. You're gonna wanna go ahead and pull that out as well. Okay, so if you come in right below that water fitting that goes to your pipe, I'm gonna try and get the light on it so you can see it. There, my light's on it there, right there. That metal tab, you're just gonna, I believe, push up. That'll unlock the air filter. Now you can come in down here and just pull your air box off of the carb. And then you can go ahead and start to slide it out. Just making sure you don't get caught on anything. Once you get it to about this position, you can lift up, kind of just rotate it out, and then get it out like that. So this is what we're getting rid of. So as you can see, this is going to be quite a significant difference. We're going to put these guys on in place of this. So next thing we're going to do is undo our choke cable, those two 10mm nuts there. We're going to back those off, and then that brass fitting right there and that one right there, we're going to undo the Allen key set screws and then take the choke rod out. So this nut right here, we're just going to back right off to get it onto the cable. Pull that washer off as well. Okay, and then once we get the choke cable undone, we can basically just pull this backwards and then slide the cable out of this groove right here. So you need a 2mm Allen key to get those set screws out. Next, we're going to get rid of our fuel lines. We've got two on this side, one going to the pump cover there, one going to that T-fitting, and then there's one more between the carburetors, which we're going to leave until we get them actually off, because you can't get to it from here. And then I'm also going to do the throttle cable, loosen off that nut just while everything's still attached to the intake, because it'll make it a lot easier to get that out. Once you got those lines off and the cable undone, there's an O-ring right under, you can see under the choke mechanism there. Those things need to come off on both sides. That's just going to help us in getting the bolt right there out. To get those carb bolts out, you're going to need a 6mm Allen key. And what you're going to want to do is crack each of them first to loosen them off, then go ahead and remove them. Don't remove one completely, just loosen them off as you go along. There's 4, 2 on the top, 2 on the bottom. Now, one trick I can give you, in the plate that holds the 2 carbs together, there's that little indent. On the top ones, obviously you can see the bolts, it's nice and easy. On the bottom ones, if you just feel around for that indent, and I'll show you when I pull the carbs out so you can see exactly what I mean, you'll find the bolts very easily. If you don't do that, you're just fiddling around trying to get them, it will be a pain to get them in. So just use your fingers, find those, and then insert your Allen key right in between there, and it'll take you right to the bolt. Okay, so once you get your carbs kind of in this position, once you get those bolts out, just remove that fuel line going to your inlet there on your pump, and you can completely remove the throttle cable. So that's your carb assembly completely removed. We're going to move this bracket because we don't need this to hold our airbox on any longer. So that can come off. We're doing the choke delete. This is going to come off here as well because that holds our choke cable. And this is what we're going to be removing. So you can see how our choke does provide a major restriction through the carburetor bore there. And then in doing so, this is where we're also going to add our primer inlet. Will be right there. Now this guy over here on this side, I failed to mention in the opening, I am going to remove the accelerator pump as well. And based on the jetting I mentioned, that's kind of a good starting point to do ProKs, and also a choke delete and accelerator pump delete. So we're going to have constant fuel supply all the time. It's not going to depend on this guy and having this set correctly, which is a pain to do when it's in the boat. So what that's going to cause us to do is we're no longer going to be using this cover. You are going to have to go and get this cover here. So one other reason when you're doing this to delete your choke is you can see that little tip of the ProK filter there that's designed to channel air right down into the carburetor. Your choke plate hits it. So it's that guy right there. When you put it on, it comes here, your choke can't close. Okay, so that is probably one of the main reasons to do it, but also just like we talked about, your high-speed screw is right here on the stock carburetors. Okay, covered with that black cap. It only allows a quarter turn, and they're supposed to be closed on a stock boat. Because we're going to be doing these jetting changes, we are going to need to use the high-speed adjuster. So these T-handles are going to make this a lot easier when we go ahead and replace that piece there, because as you can see, getting to it under your throttle linkage here is an absolute pain. So this will make that job a whole lot easier. I think these are about 15, 16 bucks a piece, and well worth it for tuning purposes. I've gone ahead and removed that choke plate there. This one's out as well, and you can see that arm's a little bit bent. These are a bit of a pain to get out. The screws, you'll probably strip those pretty quickly if you don't put a lot of downward pressure on them. So when you are taking it out, you just have to orient it so you can get the screwdriver in there, obviously. But you do have to put a lot of downward pressure on it, and it will tend to bend that arm. So you obviously don't want to do any damage to the bore there. We're going to just pinch that back. Your choke plate just obviously would slide out. So we're going to pinch that back to pull it through. Up here, we've got this nut. Just going to go ahead and undo that nut. There's a lock washer as well. Okay, and then you can just go ahead and work this assembly up. Just be aware that there's a spring under there so it doesn't shoot off on you. Okay, pull that out. There's a rubber gasket in here and on the bottom side as well. So you just need to be aware of that as you start to tap it out. So I'm going to go ahead, straighten this guy out, and then just tap it down. And you can just pull her out. As you can see, that rubber gasket came off here. Now up on this side, that gasket is still in there. So I'm just going to take a screwdriver and pry that out. So we're going to go ahead and remove the plate here that holds the 2 carbs together. 4 screws. They are bigger Phillips, so you want to make sure you use the proper size screwdriver. And I'm just going to break each one loose and then fully remove them. Once you get that off, you can just set it aside. You've got a couple gaskets as well under here. You just go ahead and remove those. Should replace those as well on the reassembly. So now we got to separate these guys. Just undid this hose clamp here to remove the fuel feed line there. These are your accelerator pump squirters, whatever you want to call them, nozzles. We're going to remove those 2 fittings there to get that off. And then we're going to just have to remove this fuel line and then the rod here that connects the 2 carbs together. Okay, so I've got this separated. I'm going to start with my magneto side carb, we're going to remove this cover plate here. So once we remove this cover, that'll access our jets and we can put the larger jets in. Okay, so that's off. You're going to want to replace this guy. This has only been in there for maybe 5-6 hours because I did just do a full cleaning on these carbs, but I already don't like the shape of it. So I'm going to go ahead and replace that. You're going to have 4 Phillips screws in here that you need to remove. The 2 smaller ones down here are usually quite easy. These 2 here holding in the valve body can be a little bit tricky. So I'm just going to go ahead and see what I can do there, and I'll show you a trick along the way to get these out if you're having trouble with them. Again, be very careful. These ones strip very easily. So those actually came out quite easily. I'll show you that trick though shortly here. So I've removed everything in there. There is that gasket under there that needs to be removed. You have your main jet, your pilot jet, and your needle seat. So all of those need to come out. These 2 jets up here just unscrew. This one here, you just usually need to use some needle nose pliers, very light pressure to pull that out. So now I've got everything out of there. What I'm going to do is through the low speed hole in the center there, I'm going to spray some carb cleaner just to ensure that everything is working fine. If you look under the throttle, you should be able to see them there. There's a hole, and then there's 3 holes in a row. That's where we want to make sure when we're spraying it that carb cleaner is coming out of those, no problem at all. This is probably the #1 spot that you're going to get a restriction. Now you should, if you haven't cleaned your carbs recently, do a full cleaning on them, including on this side, the fuel pump side as well, because there is a filter in there. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to go ahead and reassemble this once I clean that out, but you should do the entire thing. So I've got my new jets on the left. We've got a 167.5, a 95, and a 2.3 needle seat. What we took out was a 2.0 needle seat, a 75 pilot, and a 162.5 high speed. So go ahead and reinstall those guys now. So I've got that all reassembled there. The last thing just to note is we're going to retain the factory spring. In this case, you can see the difference between these 2, shiny silver and dull silver. The dull silver that we're going to use is 95 grams, and the shiny silver is 65 grams. So you definitely want to make sure you're using the right one, because that would change your pop off significantly. So I'm going to just reassemble this, and then we're going to test our pop off. Now the tip I want to give you to get these out if you're having trouble is get a screwdriver like this, and not necessarily the size, but 2 qualities of this one. Large surface area back here that you can put some palm pressure on, but this nut on it. What that allows us to do is put a wrench on it. Okay, so it's like so. You can put that in, put lots of palm pressure with one hand, and then use the torque of the screw or of the wrench on the screwdriver to pop those free. That works really well. Soak them with a bit of penetrating oil first. You shouldn't have any trouble to get that out. So I've got that carb all back together, cover plate on. I've made up this little T system here. So that's going to be my primer inlet. Install them, plug on the bottom, and then on the top here is where the primer inlet's going to go. So I've gone ahead on the bottom there, installed the brass plug, and then up on the top here, the primer inlet. And you actually don't need to use these washers. That'll go right in just like that. So next thing I'm going to do is remove this cap here from the high speed screw and unscrew that, so we can go ahead and fit it with our new T-handle adjuster. So there you can see your difference between the two. I've just moved the spring washer and put a new O-ring on to that high speed adjuster T-handle. Then we'll go ahead and reinsert it. So the last thing I've done before I'm finished with this carb is just put a cap, just a rubber cap with a zip tie onto the old injector for the accelerator pump, because we're no longer going to be using that. And other than that, this carb is done. So now I'm going to go ahead and repeat the exact same steps on this side. You know, we're going to eliminate our accelerator pump assembly here. We're going to eliminate this bracket because I don't think we're going to use that for anything. But we will have to get that new cover plate. So we got to get this style one. They're still available from Mikuni. So I'll put a part number up in the description for you for that. So all the jetting changes are done. I've replaced the fuel lines. I started off with the low speed screws up here at 1.5 turns out. And then the high speed ones, to adjust these, it really helps if you hold the throttle open. Got those guys set at, I think I did them at 1/2 turn. I wrote it down here. I'll double check, but I'm pretty sure those are 1/2 turn just to start out. Now you notice my accelerator pump's still there. Unfortunately, this new cover piece has not come in time, so I just threw that on to keep it all in there and intact and no dust or anything getting in there. So once that comes, I'll be ready to throw these on. The other thing I did was just synchronized the two, made sure this was all equal, so when throttle opens, both are opening right on time. So now to mount the primer in the boat, I've just got this bracket. It's actually a bracket for a like a commercial radio to mount on your vehicle. I'll throw up a part number in the description, and I've just bent it just by screwing it into a piece of wood and hitting it with a hammer, as you can tell. And I'll show you where I'm going to mount this. Now you do have the option of mounting it where your choke was. If you do that though, you got to run your fuel line down through here, across, and into where your carbs are going to be down here. And then you're also going to have to get down here to tap into your reserve fuel line where we're going to get our fuel from. So rather than doing all that, I just drilled a couple holes right there. So just like our fuel filter's mounted, I'm just going to rivet this guy on. And then as the lid closes and the white storage tray goes in, it's not going to interfere with that at all. So I'll just put a couple washers on there on the backs of those rivets before I put them in, and we're good to go. Kind of comes right in between the two vent hoses there. So we're going to tap into the reserve portion of our fuel system here, not the main portion, because we don't want to cause a restriction with the T-connector we're going to put in. So the easiest way to access that is through the access panel that's right under our seat. So we're just going to pop out these guys. As you can see, it exposes a 10 mil nut and bolt there, or bolt I should say. So we're going to pop those out, and then I'll do that on each side. And then you can actually just rotate the seat on the hinge, and that'll allow you to swing it out of the way enough to access the fuel line so you can disconnect it from your sender. Once you get those bolts out, you got one more up here. That'll then allow you to just pull the seat out from that triangle mount there, and do that on both sides. As you can see, you can kind of just pivot it up out of the way. And you should have a cover there. I've already removed this one though. So that's our fuel sender right there through that hole. Just gonna remove this split loom. It's held on by a zip tie. And then disconnect our reserve line. And I'm gonna pull that through. Just get it out up here. And then I'll be able to see where I need to make the cut to put the T-connector in for the primer. Okay, so those carbs are all set back together. Got that new plate on there. Got rid of that accelerator pump, and I'm so glad to do that. Just got myself a set of new gaskets. Got my bolts ready to go. So I'm going to go ahead and bolt these guys back on. I'm going to go ahead and put the Outerwears on the ProK filters next, just to make it easier. Those things can be a little tricky to get on because they tend to get caught on the metal a little bit, so just be very careful about that. Just get them into place, and then we're going to go and grab our hose clamps here. Then we can go ahead and put those on the carbs. So I like to leave them like that, just so the Outerwears are not around the bottom completely. I want to get that hose clamp tightened down first. And also you'll notice there is a lip in there, so you actually don't need any O-ring or anything like that. That'll seat right into the carburetor on these 951s. So I got those flame arrestors on there. Can't really see that one, it's right under the pipe. Got my primer nozzle hose hook up there. What I did with this is just under the pipe here where the two primer inlets are, you're gonna have the hose touch the pipe. So I'll show you just right down in between them there. You can see my T-connector. What I did was zip tie it to one of the holes that the airbox mounting hardware was on. So it just runs down between the carbs. And then as you can see, comes up there, zip tied it up to that fuel line, and then it comes right back up to my primer there. I got my other line on the primer there, the pink one going to the T-connector that we tapped into the reserve line. So right up under the seat where that access panel was, where the hoses came out and the split loom came, that's where I had my T-connector. I just had the split loom right around that to protect it, and then the primer hose is running down and then into the primer there. So now we're going to do the throttle cable adjustment. First thing you want to do is your idle speed screw down there. You just want to make sure that there's a gap between that and the stopper. The other thing you want to do is come into this compartment, remove your storage bin, then right here on your throttle cable, you just want to make sure this black piece is twisted all the way down. If you have it twisted where it's up and that nut is up there, that's going to change your adjustments. You want to do that. There's also one of those on the oil line, which is right here. As you can see, this one already is adjusted, so I'm going to have to back that nut off, back this down. So those are a couple things you need to do. Also, what I'd recommend is get your throttle cable where you're going to have it in the boat, and in this case it's going to be under our oil tank. So I'm going to go ahead, reinstall this guy. As you can see, there's a channel in there for the throttle cable. So I'm going to go ahead and reinstall that, reinstall my oil tank, and then get everything all set up the way I want it before I begin the cable adjustment. So once you get everything reset, what you want to do is come down here with your 10mm wrench, and you want to take up the free play in the throttle cable between the throttle cable and then your throttle position sensor, which is under your oil box. So as long as you have all the free play taken up in there, you may just have just a slight amount of slack in the throttle cable. That's how you want to have that set. That's really the only thing I like to do when adjusting the throttle cable on the land. Everything else I like to do on the water, just real world situation. You know, you can get it into the ballpark by adjusting your idle stop screw to 3000 RPM when the boat's not in the water. But personally, I like to get it done when you're in the water. So I'm going to go to the lake, heat this thing up, get it nice and warm, and then from there we're going to start to make our adjustments to get it to idle at 1500 RPM. So I know it's been a pretty long video so far. Those are the mods you can do to your carbs on these things, just a quick bolt-on thing you can do in a weekend. So I'm going to head to the lake now and do the rest out there. As I said, I like to do that on the water. So that'll be part 2 of the video. I'll show you getting this thing all tuned in and see how she goes.